My name is Amy and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, Amy. I like that nickname a lot better. Back home in Sydney, I'm called Stalker Amy because of my story. So Australian Amy is a lot nicer. I have the great honour of introducing your speaker tonight, who is my lovely friend Georgia, and she's come in from Los Angeles, and we have known each other since we were both about 3 years sober. And I met Georgia, I'd gotten a sponsor who was in the same group as her in Los Angeles, and I'd lost the ability to be able to have a good time. I didn't know how to laugh in sobriety. I'd gone really crazy in sobriety, and I met her, and we laughed so hard together that she helped me believe that I could stay here and have a good time and be able to laugh. And we were having a lot of fun today, and I'm just really grateful that she's here. I'm grateful that the group has brought her out so that that I could get to see her and so that you can get to hear her. But you're going to have a lot of fun listening to her, and I'm going to introduce her. This is Georgia. She's your speaker.
Hi everyone, my name is Georgia. I'm an alcoholic. Really grateful to be here and to be sober, and thank you, Amy, for when I first met her, her accent was a little bit thicker, and she's like, "Hi, my name is Amy," and I'm like, "Amy? Is that O-I?" And she's like, "No, it's Amy." Whatever. But we've been friends for a long time, and thanks to AA, AA has made my world this really small place. The world used to seem so big and scary, and now I have friends everywhere thanks to this program. And we were friends when Amy lived in Australia, and friends now here in Utah, and hopefully she'll get closer to LA soon, I hope. Let me thank Neil, too, for inviting me. Thank you to everybody who's been so kind. It's really great to be here. And thank you, Julie, for doing my travel stuff. I don't know where Julie is, but thank you. I've been sober since February 1st, 1993. So I turned 31 February 1st. I got sober when I was 24. I was pretty sure that my life was over at that point. But it turned out it was just beginning. And I've been able to have a big, beautiful life's in session, for sure. The ups, the seemingly good, the seemingly bad, for the last 31 years, in spite of myself. A great deal of my joy comes from doing things I don't want to do every single day, because all I want to do is lay in bed and watch reruns of Law and Order and Sex and the City. Actually, right now I'm watching Bosch, and I'm in love with Bosch, not the actor who plays Bosch, the actual character Bosch. I want to be with Bosch forever and ever, and so I'm very, very happy that I've learned to say yes when I'm asked to do something. When my calendar's open, whether it's AA or just a regular invite to do something, if my calendar's open, I say yes, and I think of that as God is keeping my calendar, which kind of made me throw up a little bit when I said that, but I did not come here believing in God or having any kind of spiritual practice at all, but just that simple thing of saying, as my sponsor, Marilyn, says, yes to the universe. I've been able to do a lot of things I wouldn't have wanted to do and I would have missed. I don't remember my first drink, but alcohol was always a part of my life. As a kid, I drank out of the adults' drinks, and I was arrested for drinking in public by the time I was 11, which is insane. I look at kids who are 11 now and they just look like babies to me, but I didn't feel like a baby. My dad had died when I was 6, and I was raised by a single mom who was really depressed and angry and was not planning on raising a kid on her own. And our house was it was sad, and, my dad was dying for a long time before he died. He died of cancer, and there's just a lot of sadness in my house. And then after he died, my mom had to work 3 jobs to be able to pay the bills and keep the lights on, and she didn't have any skills. She didn't work before he died. She didn't drive, so she took the jobs she could, and she worked in a school cafeteria doing hard labor for the first part of the day, and then cleaned a different person's house after that every single day of the week. And then on the weekend, she cleaned a church, and when she was at home, she just sat in front of the TV. TV is a big theme in my story, apparently, but we love the TV in my family. And My mom would sit at home and smoke her more menthols and cuss at the TV and yell at the cats, which was really embarrassing when I had friends over. But she did not want to be bothered with me. I knew she loved me, but she did not want to hug me or talk to me. She didn't want to talk about my dad. She didn't want to see me be sad about him dying. It was just, not now. I got a lot of that. And I couldn't articulate it at the time, but my first higher power was your approval, and I needed it like I needed oxygen. I developed this idea that if somebody loved me, I'd be okay, and that's all I aspired to do and be, is to find someone to love me so I'd be okay. And what that ended up looking like when I got to the fourth column of my fourth step is that I was kind of a hoe. And I didn't mean to be. Genuinely, I meant to be loved. I really thought if I could find someone to love me, I'd be okay. I watched, as I said, a lot of TV, a lot of movies, and it seemed to me that once you find love, you have a family, and everything else falls into place. And so that was my plan. I never aspired to go to school. No one in my family ever went to college or did anything like that. That wasn't even on my radar. I aspired to do or be nothing but loved. And I didn't learn until I had double-digit sobriety that a man is not a plan. But for many decades, it was my only plan. And so that started out really young for me. And I just needed someone to love me so I'd be okay. And the kids that were my age were playing with dolls and making mud pies and playing board games and stuff. And I had serious stuff going on. I had these really big emotions. I feel like I was born singing the blues. Everything was so huge to me. And the kids my age didn't understand me, and I was about the height I am now in elementary school, which is not cool. I was 5'7", and everybody else was this big, so I was like a big old girl. The kids used to call me BFU, which stands for Big, Fat, and Ugly. Not what I was. Oh, thank you. Maybe I'm not an alcoholic after all. So I started hanging out with the older kids. They were more accepting of me, and I felt a part of something, and they were smoking, and they were drinking. I'd already been stealing my mom's Buick Wildcat for a while at that point because my dad's car was left in the driveway after he died. Our house, I don't know if any of you have seen Sanford and Sons. So that's what our house looked like. The yard was filled with junk. The yard was overgrown. Our house was filthy, never cleaned, ever. Clutter. My mom was a hoarder. We were the house in the neighborhood that brought down the value of your house. And I know that because people told me that often. So I started hanging out with the older kids, felt a part of that. The Buick. So the Buick was parked in the driveway. And I was always seeking to feel better. I was always so sad. Always so sad and just such a bummer. And then I started stealing that car and having fun and smoking and hanging out with the kids. And I don't remember ever crossing an invisible line. I don't remember a first drink. I'm really jealous of those people who remember taking a first drink. It went boom, I went ah. I don't have that. I feel like I just tapered on. I started drinking out of adults' drinks as a baby, and then just, by the time I was 11 and 12, by the time I was 12, I was a daily drinker. And the way I did that was I stole booze a lot. And then finally my mom threw up her hands and said, if you're going to smoke and you're going to drink, I'd rather you do it here. I don't want you getting into trouble, so just do it in your room. I was like, cool. And so I took that really literally, and I started packing in all, your kids into my room, all my friends who had curfews and rules and stuff like that. I've never been grounded. I've never had any rules at all, ever. And so I started packing everyone into my room, and what my mom would do is she would just pull her TV on the TV stand just a little bit closer to her reclining chair and just turn it up louder. And she was so sad and so angry, and I couldn't understand. I felt it, but I didn't know why I felt so sad and so angry, and she did too, but I believe she knew why. And so I would listen to music, and I'd write in my journal, and I just why am I alive? I hated my life. But when I drank, it was fun, and so that's all I ever wanted to do. And I drank like a pig. I was proud of how I drank. My girlfriends are drinking wine coolers, and they're starting to feel it, and I'm in the backyard with the guys beer bonging, and I was really proud of how I drank, really proud of weird things, like I could put out cigarettes with my bare feet. I thought that was cool. I could open a beer bottle. I don't need a opener. I can use a lighter or whatever. Like, I was really proud of these things, and it's kind of sad. But so I'm packing my room full of all my friends. I'm partying every day. I get up to go to school only to hook up with my friends, and then we're off stealing some booze, partying at the park, going back to my house. And I might be waking up from my first blackout when my mom's coming home in between jobs to go to her next thing. And I thought I never really hurt her. I just thought she didn't care about me. And I thought she didn't love me. And I thought it's a weird thing I didn't realize until I was sober a while. I didn't think that I mattered enough to hurt people. And the longer I've been sober, the more I can see how much I've hurt people. And anyway, back then I was a victim. So I wasn't hurting anyone. Everyone was hurting me. And so I had my first suicide attempt by the time I was 12 because I hated myself so desperately. I had another one when I was 13, and also at 13, I ended up pregnant, and I terminated that pregnancy at the urging of my mom and my boyfriend. I did not want to do that, but I did it because my mom was so torn up, and I could not bear my mom being in pain, and so I just agreed, and then I drank over that and hated her for years and years. And it wasn't until I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that I learned that we won't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. But back then I was just collecting regret. But things today, with 31 years, things stay in a place of regret until I can either use that experience to help someone else or use that experience to change something I'm going through. But back then, I didn't have any tools, so it was just, I was doing things that I regretted and then having to drink over those. And it was just a vicious cycle. And I always, like I said, I always drank like a pig. I love Old English 800. I drank 10 high whiskey. I'm a very classy drinker. Later I drank vodka because I wanted to keep my weight down because I had to be skinny and perfect so you love me so I'd be okay. Everything kind of led back to that. You've got to love me so I'll be okay. So I was in and out of school because every day I'm just partying. I hook up with my friends, I party, tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow I'll catch up. Well, I don't. I drop out every year. And the way I was able to go to the next grade was either go to summer school or continuation. So I spent several years at our alternate school with all the bad kids, but we got to call our teachers by their first name and smoke. What's up, Phil? Time for class. But I actually did really well there because I needed attention. I needed a lot of attention, and so I actually thrived there. But what happened was, as soon as my mom knew I was going to graduate from high school, she claimed bankruptcy. She quit those 3 jobs, claimed bankruptcy, and moved up north to where my grandma lived. And my mom and grandma were my only family. I was reminded of this all the time, especially after my dad died. It's only the 3 of us. We only have each other. We have to rely on each other. Life sucks. The world sucks. It's a cold, hard, scary place. You're going to have to work one day, and it's going to be terrible. We need to stick together. And these were like my people. It was really a bummer. And I hated being with them. And after my dad died, we really didn't celebrate holidays. There weren't Christmas trees and things like that. We exchanged gifts, but there was no we didn't really celebrate anything. We didn't go on any family vacations. The only place my mom and I ever went together was to my grandma's house, and we'd have to go every long holiday, like Memorial Day weekend, stuff like that, and then during the summer. And I hated leaving my friends to go to my grandma's house. My grandma lived in a tiny little house, and my mom and grandma didn't seem to like each other very much, and were really uncomfortable being in the same room together. So in their tiny house and the 3 of us in one room, it was brutal. And they watched brown TV all day in their house coats. And brown TV like Bonanza and all these Westerns, everything was brown. And they were smoking their brown cigarettes, and smoke was everywhere. And I smoked and I couldn't breathe. And I would like try and open the door, and they'd be like, "Shut the door, you're letting the smoke out." I hated being there. And as I got older, I started just walking the streets of this town and being picked up by people who were partying. And I remember one time I was there, I got picked up by a guy one day, and we went to party at the park and other things. And then the next day, I saw him again. And I'm like, "Hey, are you going to the park?" And he goes, "No, I'm going to the cemetery." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I went to the cemetery with him, and then we visited a little bit. And then I found out that it wasn't the same guy. They were twins. But I genuinely thought maybe this is the one who's going to love me, you know. I was such a sad kid, you know. And but I started partying up at my grandma's house, which made it a little bit more bearable. And my mom and grandma drank, and they didn't care if I drank, but hanging out with them was a bummer. And my mom and grandma never really thought that I had a drinking problem, even as I hit bottom and all the stuff that I'm telling you, they never thought I was that bad. And I often wondered about like if I'm not bad, what are they comparing me to? But the one thing we would do at my grandma's house that I always loved is we would go to the Brambles. It was this very fancy restaurant with cloth tablecloths. That seems redundant, but it was fancy, and red booths, and it was a fine steakhouse. And we'd go there one time on each visit, and I always loved to go there. So one night at the Brambles, my mom and grandma were drinking and eating and smoking all at the same time, because that's what they did. And all of a sudden there was a big hustle at the table, rustling, and then my mom ran with a napkin, ran to the bathroom, and came back to the table, and I was just paralyzed, like, I don't know what just happened. And I said, Mom, what's wrong? And she said it as if I should know. She said, your grandma shit her pants, Georgie. And I was like, oh, at the Brambles? No, no. But the worst part is we didn't leave. They ordered another drink and they lit a cigarette. And so I've thought about this over the years, that maybe they didn't think my drinking was as bad because I hadn't shat myself yet at dinner. But I hated my grandma. My grandma would come to me all drunk. She used to say, your grandma's not an alcoholic, I'm just a drunk. Now I know those words are the same thing, but back then I didn't know that. And she would tell me, your mom is sad and depressed because of you, and you ruined her life. And if your dad were alive, he'd be so disappointed in your hair stringing, the way you dress, and blah, 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 blah. And then she would say, and I'm going to be dying soon too, and you'd better shape up. And I didn't like her, but I certainly didn't want her to die. And I found out later that she started telling my mom that she was dying when my mom was 9, and she had my mom when she was 18. So my grandma died from the age of 27 until she actually died at 90. But I didn't know that back then, so it really scared me. And I felt guilty, and I felt responsible for their life. And when I feel that way, when someone makes me feel that way, I don't want to be around them. And then I build a case against them. If you make me feel bad, I'm going to build a case about why you're bad. And so it just created more distance. But so when my mom claimed bankruptcy and said she's moving home to grandma, I'm like, cool, Cuckoo Town is all contained. I can live the way I've always wanted to live, which I'd always lived, because I'm very selfish, never thought about anyone else. And I ended up getting a really great job right out of high school. I graduated with my class. Sometimes our character defects work in our favor, and my ego wouldn't allow me not to graduate with my class. So I got all the credits you get in 3 years. I got in 1 year, graduated with my class, and got this great job. It was a nonprofit in Pasadena, and I was doing really well because we're smart. We're not stupid people. It's just drinking becomes my priority all the time. So I can get a job, I can even get maybe a promotion or two, but my drinking's always going to bring everything tumbling down, and that's what happened here. And I started having an affair with my married boss, and it became a scandal, and it was in the papers, and I had to leave that job. And I ended up getting another job, but I wasn't as happy there. My world was getting smaller because I lie and cheat and steal from everyone I know and love, so I don't have a lot of friends anymore. Work's getting harder and harder, and I'm having trouble showing up to work and coming up with new excuses why I'm missing. And so I'm about to break up with this guy because he can't love me enough. If you can't love me enough, I'm going to get another one. I'm going to overlap you because I can't have any lag in service. So it's time for me to find another one. But I was so tired. I sometimes forget how tired I was when I came here. I was so tired, and I just thought, I can't do this anymore. And I had one last suicide attempt, and I had to have my stomach pumped. And and I thought, I can't even do that. And my world had become so small. And my roommate had been out of town when I had that suicide attempt. And when she came back, she told me that her brother needed a place to stay because he had a little problem with crack cocaine. And spoiler alert, there are no little problems with crack cocaine. But he came to live with us. And the thing I liked most about him is he was crazy about me. And it didn't matter how I felt about him at all. And it turns out he wasn't done with that crack pipe. Surprise. And he hadn't been to a rehab or anything. It was just like, I just don't do it anymore. It's magic. And so he starts acting all weird, and he's like, shh, shh, shh. And he's looking out the window. I'm like, what is going on? But I can't break up with him, and it's really hard to be with someone who has a different buzz. I remember hanging out with my friends, like in my teens, and people are smoking pot, and they're laughing at cartoons and stuff. And I'm like, you're so stupid. And then you smoke some, and you're like, Or I used to go to a lot of kegger parties in the 80s, and you'll see like 2 or 3 people going into the same bathroom stall, and you're like, what's going on there? And then they come out, and they're like, I remember my boyfriend trying to tell me he wasn't doing anything. He's like, what? I didn't do anything. So anyway, flash forward, I'm with this guy, and he's acting weird, and so I said, I want some. And within 6 months, I lost everything I started smoking that with him, and I got evicted from where I live, fired from my job, and he sold my car for a piece of crack cocaine, which went for about $20 at the time. And I had no place to go, and my best friend Diana, she and I grew up together, and we used to party together, but she grew out of it, graduated a semester early, moved to San Diego, was living a big life, and I had continued to stay in and around our hometown, just circling the drain. And she had the kind of family that I would see on TV. They sat down to eat dinner at the same time every day. They loved each other. They went on family vacations. They were so much fun. And they ate dinner at the same time every day. And sometimes I'd be invited, and I loved to just sit at their table and just observe, you know. And so when I had no place to go, they offered to let me come stay in a room they had in their basement. And so I went to live there. And, you know, by that time I was clear, I've got a problem with drugs. Got it. Done. I'm just not going to do them anymore. It's so easy. I'll just drink. But this had happened throughout my sobriety. I tried things, and when it got out of control, I could always stop because of alcohol. But now I'm tired. I don't have as much fight left in me. And so I had been to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, a couple over the years, with friends who really needed it, because I'm a good friend. But there was always some reason I found that it wouldn't work for me. And that was, you know, the God stuff. I wasn't raised with any kind of religion, and if there's a God, I don't really care for his work so far. So that wasn't going to work. And then I thought I wasn't as bad as you guys. Now I have the crack experience. Now I'm too bad for you guys. But the other thing is, I remember some old guy, probably my age, who got up and said, you know, it's the first drink that gets you drunk. And I remember thinking, what a bunch of lightweights. I didn't understand what that meant. And this is the time period where I really got to understand what that meant. And that is, the only choice I have is whether I pick up that first drink. Once I pick up that first drink, the choice is no longer mine. So that's where the action really needs to happen before you pick up that first drink. But I didn't know that. So I was picking up a first drink and making plans about what I wasn't going to do this time. All that chapter 3 stuff, and I was doing it all. And it was getting really exhausting, and I was hating myself more and more, and it was some of the darkest and most depraved drinking. I have like flashes of things that happened during that time that I just, like make me feel sick. And so I thought, well, I should probably just quit drinking. I'll see how that goes. I'm going to white knuckle it. And that was the most miserable I'd ever been. And so I decided that it's probably my fate to be miserable. That's my mom and grandma's fate. It's my fate. And if I'm going to be miserable, I'd rather be drunk. And so I stopped trying to do anything to stop. And I poured myself a drink, and it was the first time I didn't feel guilty about pouring myself a drink in the longest time. And just then the phone rang, and it was a guy by the name of Jeff Monahan. He was a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous who had sobered up in Los Angeles and moved to San Diego and happened to work at the same place that my normie friend, whose parents I was living with, was working. And so she found out that he was sober and started confiding in him about her loser friend living with her parents. And he offered to call me, and that was the phone call. So I picked up the phone, and He said, I understand you have a problem with alcohol. And for whatever reason, I told this stranger, yes, I do. And he said, I want to give you the number of a woman to call in AA. And he gave me the number of Pat Y. And I called Pat, and she said, my husband Vince and I are going to a meeting. Why don't you come with us? And for whatever reason, I drove to this stranger's house, got in this stranger's car, which is really not unusual for me, but doing that sober was. And they took me to the big Wednesday Pacific Group meeting, which looked a lot more like this meeting, where the light was on in people's eyes and people were happy and sober at the same time. I always thought it was an or conversation. You were happy or sober. I didn't know you could be both. And it's still, I get goosebumps. A stranger called me, gave me the number of another stranger who took me to a room full of strangers, and I've been sober ever since. And that just blows me away. And when I try to articulate what God's grace is, I go to that moment. And so Pat said, I'll be your sponsor until you find one. Thank God. And she started me on a really simple course of action, and that was going to regular meetings on regular days. So Monday, I go to the same meeting every single Monday. I get a commitment at that meeting, a little job, and call her every day. You know, every day I had a different meeting I was going to, call her every day. Okay, I'll do that. And at first I thought, I'll try this for 30, 60, 90 days, because those were the numbers I was hearing a lot. But in our home group, we were talking a lot about getting a first-year foundation, because that's what you're going to build the rest of your sobriety upon. And this is one of the great things about being a member of a home group, is that everybody's saying the same thing, everybody's doing the same thing, and that's what happened for me. And so it was easy to just jump in and do what everybody in their first year was doing. And I was 24 and a half when I got sober, so I wanted to get on the fast track. I'm like, okay, now that I'm sober, I want to go to school. I want to get a great job. I'm going to quit smoking, get a good exercise regime, nice diet plan. And now that I'm well, it's time for a relationship. And when my sponsor stopped laughing, she suggested that I just focus on getting that first year foundation. And I'm so grateful that I did that, because I've fallen on that foundation so many times, over the last 3 decades. So I always thought structure was the man trying to keep you down, people over 30 who don't understand freedom. But I had never had structure in my life, ever. I never went to school on a regular basis. I never ate dinner on a regular basis. There was nothing structured in my life, ever. So by having just a little bit of structure, regular meetings, regular days, calling Pat every day, I started thriving. And it's like the more structure I had, the calmer I was. The more structure I had, the more creative I was. The more I did, the more I could do. It didn't seem to work on paper, but it was like time seemed to bend. And it's like so many other things I've learned in AA, total opposite of what I thought. And so I began to really thrive on that. And I was about 2 weeks sober. And right before I got sober, I went around to some people who lived in my neighborhood growing up, because I was 100% sure that I was the way I was because of something my mom and grandma and my dad did. And so I was going to find out what that was. So I went around and I said, do you know what happened to me? Was I abused? And everyone's like, no, I don't know anything. And I fancy myself a bit of a detective. And I had been through all of my mom and grandma's personal belongings over the years, but I'd never been able to unearth the secrets of me. And so I'd given up that idea until this family friend came forward and said, I know some stuff. And I was like, I knew it, which is my favorite thing to say. And he told me all this stuff that my mom had lied to me about. And I'm like, oh, yeah, what else? And so I wrote down everything he told me, because when you hurt me, I like to be super specific when I throw it in your face. And I didn't want to miss a thing when I told my mom what I really thought about her. And so I was going to take this list to my mom, but something made me call Pat instead. And I said, look at what I found out. And she said, it's so good you have that written down. You're going to need that later. But for now, I want you to work on being a good daughter and granddaughter. And I thought, did she not hear me? What is happening here? But I said, okay, and we came up with a formula, because I don't know how to be a good daughter or granddaughter. Like, I've got zero experience in that area. And so we came up with a formula that I would call once a week, write once a week, and visit as often as I could. And if I were doing these things, then I would know I'd done everything I could. And maybe, just maybe, I could stay sober. I loved my mom and grandma. They were my only family. I was very protective of them, loyal. I loved them, but I also was embarrassed of them. I blamed them for my unhappiness. I was ashamed of them. I felt guilty about them, all at the same time. And I don't think I could have stayed sober with that kind of angst had I not changed my behavior right away. And so I started sending the card once a week, which was awkward. I don't know what to say, so I wrote a little bit of something. And then the weekly calls, really awkward, because I used to only call when I was in trouble. You know, I don't have any money, I don't have a place to live, call you soon, and then I wouldn't call for months. And so I began doing that, and it started getting easier. And then my letters became a little bit longer, you know, starting to have all these really cool, my sponsor would have called them God shots. I called them coincidences, because God shots made me go, ooh. But tons of God shots. So I started writing to my mom and grandma about my adventures in sobriety and all these amazing things that were happening. And then I started thinking about how they must be saving each of these cards, maybe in a lovely decorative box, or maybe tied with a lovely ribbon, and maybe they even reread them from time to time on a cold winter's night, such as tonight, home in front of a fire. Oh, remember this one. But that's not what was happening. I found out when I made my weekly call, and my mom said, well, we've been getting your cards, but Grandma's been having to white them out to reuse them, and we're wondering if you could start writing them in pencil. And so I did, and I want to tell you why, because this is the most important thing, is I now had a sponsor who told me I'd never have to go through anything alone and I could take all my problems to her. I was having an experience of my own higher power as a result of going through the steps with a sponsor. I had more friends than I dreamed a girl like me could ever have, and I was learning I had more tools than I ever knew even existed. And it may not be fair, but he with the most tools has the most responsibility, and in this case it was me. So I wrote those damned cards in pencil. And at first I wrote a little bit less to punish them, but they didn't notice. Story of my life. But eventually I picked up the pace again. And what I learned from this experience was that I'm only responsible for my side of the street. What you do on your side of the street, none of my business. The dirtier your side of the street is, the cleaner mine needs to be. And the exercise here was to be a good daughter and granddaughter, not if they reciprocate, not if I deem them worthy or any of that stuff. My actions define who I am, and I can be, and this transfers into every area of my life. I can be a good employee even if my boss is a jerk. I can be a good friend even if my friend commits a friendship crime, or whatever it is. So that was a really great lesson in that. And the other thing that was happening is, as I was listening to your stories, so honest, so just true, and sharing things that I had never heard people say out loud, my fear of my mom's sadness and anger began to get better, and I began not fearing them so much. And as I was writing the cards, and I like to dot my I's with little hearts, so as I'm writing the cards, I'm swirling with love. You know, I select the card, I'm thinking of them. I'm writing the card, I'm thinking of them. I'm putting it in the mail, I'm feeling good that I'm doing this, and I'm filling with love. And it was the action of loving them that made me love them. It was never them loving me. I had always been looking for someone to love me so I'd be okay. And getting is good, getting feels good, but getting has never filled that emptiness inside. The only thing that's ever filled that emptiness for me is my loving you. It's when I'm lonely, I've got to pick up the phone. It's my being of service that fills me up. And I was beginning to learn that at this point. I got really busy in my group. I made it to my first year, and in our group, we have a watch the night before you turn one, and everybody gathers at a coffee shop, and as it gets closer to midnight, they get closer to your booth, and then they sing happy birthday at midnight. It's really cool. Maybe it doesn't translate, but it's a rite of passage in our group, and the only way you can have a watch is you have to go to watches, so I didn't sleep for like a year, and I wanted my damn watch, and there were probably like 200 people at my watch, and it was on a weeknight. I could not believe how many people showed up for me. And like I came into the rooms the loneliest person in the world, or so I thought until I met the island of misfit toys. But just in a year, my life had grown so much, and I stayed out of a relationship for that year in about an hour and a half. Because I take direction really literally. And so at 1:30 a.m., I consummated a relationship with my new fella, and we were engaged 2 weeks later, and we were married 6 months later, and I was married to him my first 5 years of sobriety. And those were great years because we always put AA first. We always stayed really close to our sponsors. So when it didn't work out, we didn't have to be ugly to one another or fight over our home group or anything like that. and that's all AA. When we split up, by that time in my sobriety, I had a job that I loved. My life was operating at very high velocity. I worked full time. I was going to meetings. I'm taking newcomers to meetings. I'm taking sick people to doctor's appointments. I'm taking meetings to sick people's houses. I'm, doing food lists for people who are sick or whatever. And however I could be of service, I just became like a service junkie because it felt so good. But like 7 days a week, I was just like, very little sleep, just go, go, go. And I was taking classes in, I love music, so I was taking voice lessons and I was taking improv classes. I was just having so much fun. And then I had to have back surgery, and I had minor back surgery early in sobriety, but I had to have a spinal fusion. And I was in like that 1% where something went wrong, and I ended up being bedridden for a year. So I went from high velocity action to, and so I had to learn a whole new way to be of service. And one of those ways was to allow people to help me, which was really humbling. And I had people babysitting me because I had to have somebody with me every single day. Oh, so humbling. I had people babysitting me I honestly wouldn't have had a cup of coffee with. But Keith Carpenter is an old-timer in the Southern California area, and he used to talk about the seemingly good and the seemingly bad. And I look at my life at these seemingly bad times, and they turn out to be some of the best times of my life, where I've felt the most connected and the most loved and laughed the most genuinely and cried the most deeply, and it was all okay. And, my mom and grandma and a couple of my friends couldn't be there for me during that time. And I took that personally until I began to understand that that was about them, not about me, and that God's given me just what I need, just when I need it, and sometimes not a second before. And I was given everything I needed. I was never alone. I was always well taken care of. I had been dating this guy for a while, and it was a little overwhelming for him, so he came to me one day. I'd been sick for months at that point, and he said he'd consider a relationship and a commitment with me when I was well, and he dumped me, and I was devastated. And I called my sponsor, who has been Marilyn Slater for the last 29 years, and I called her, and I'd been calling her with each update of all these horrible things. Can't work, can't drive, all these things that were happening because I couldn't do anything. So I called her and I said, and now I got dumped. And at the time she was learning to play guitar, so she'd often be plucking away in the background. And so this time I tell her that, and she says, oh, this sounds like a wonderful country western song. And she started playing a country chord progression and sang my blues, and it just made me laugh. And Amy knows Marilyn. She's one of the funniest human beings I've ever met. And I'm so grateful to have a sponsor who finds so much humor in my darkest moments. But truly I am, because she never lets me take myself too seriously. But at that point I was so full of uselessness and self-pity. And we can pray for character defects to be removed, but what normally happens is an assignment appears. And in this case, there was a man in our group named Mike Finch. He was 34 years old, and he'd been diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. And I watched him go from walking and talking to being paralyzed from the neck down. But this guy was so happy. He sponsored tons of guys. He had his handicap van, and he'd pack it full of people. And his sponsee would drive, and they'd go to conferences and ball games. I used to call him the Make-A-Wish boy. It's a little distasteful, but he had a good sense of humor, too. But his wife had also left him when he was sick, and so he and I became friends, and then we became more than friends, and I was able to take care of him for the last 6 months of his life. And I did not know I was capable of loving someone that way. I'd always measured love in what I was getting, and this was a whole flip on that. I'd spent my whole life trying to buffer myself from the bad feelings. I don't want to feel the sad, the scared, none of those ones. I like all the happy ones over here. But what I've come to find out in sobriety is that Alcoholics Anonymous gives us this beautiful net with God, steps, sponsorship, all the tools we have here. It gives us this beautiful net, so I get to love a man that I know is going to die, and it's not going to break me. And I get to have that experience. I get to pursue dreams and fall on my face because that beautiful net is there to catch me. I remember there was a woman in our group. Her son died on a senior trip in a car accident, and she was grieving, and she grieved for a long time. And if you stay sober long enough, people are going to say really stupid things. They don't mean to. They're trying to reach out. But people were commenting on the length of time she'd been grieving, and perhaps it had been too long, and they had many suggestions for her. And I remember her saying, that she wanted to feel every feeling that had to do with this glorious boy that she loved so much. And that always stuck with me. Like, that was a gift too. All of the feelings that we get to experience here are part of the human experience. And because of this beautiful net that AA gives us, I got to feel all of it and have that deep, rich experience. And I'm so grateful for that. About a month before Mike passed away, my grandma got sick, and I was able to go see her. Mike's caregiver actually drove up to where my mom and grandma lived, and I got to see her one last time. But by then, my grandma turned into a nice grandma, and I don't know when that happened, because she did not like me. I mean, every family picture where she's standing next to me, she looks like this. She was so mean. And then one day, a few months into this process of making the calls and sending the cards, she started saying things like, well, you know your grandma loves you. I'd be like, what? No. Inside voice, though. But she stayed nice grandma. And I think just as our disease ripples out into the lives of the people we love, so does our recovery. And my mom and grandma's lives were profoundly changed by Alcoholics Anonymous without going to a meeting, reading the big book, or even quitting drinking. But they were profoundly affected because of you, through me. And so when my grandma died, we were good. She was my granny goose, and I loved her. And I was able to be there for my mom. And then about a month later, Mike passed away, and I ended up moving back to Los Angeles. I still have chronic pain issues. If you have any suggestions, no, but thank you so much. I treat my chronic pain with AA and Pilates, and that works for me. But we're not supposed to say our case is different, but I do want to say if you suffer with chronic pain, our case is different. And what that means for me is I have to do twice as much to feel half as good. I don't get to be like some of my friends who go to 1 or 2 meetings a week. Maybe they sponsor, maybe they don't. Maybe they have a commitment, maybe they don't. And they're happy, joyous, and damn free. Not me. That is not me. And that's where the power comes in, knowing who I am and what I need. But anyway, I ended up moving back to LA. And my mom asked to see me, and I drove up to where she was living, and she said, there's some things I think you should know now that Grandma's gone. She said, your grandma was a really private person, and she told me all those secrets I'd written in the book. Now, the secrets that I had written were that my mom and dad were actually not married, that my dad was a womanizer and an alcoholic, that my mom had embezzled the money that my dad left me, and some other stuff like that. But I had never told my mom that I knew any of that. So my mom said she needed to talk to me, and she told me a whole lot more. She started by telling me that at 8 years old, my grandma was sent to live with another family because my grandma's parents couldn't take care of her and her sister. And so where my grandma went to live, she never went to another day of school and was physically abused and sexually abused by the men in that house. And the way my grandma got out of that is she got pregnant by a man she didn't love at 18 and had my mom. And then by the time my mom was born, she'd already left that man, and she was out drinking and living her life. And so she started leaving my mom to stay with other families and leaving my mom in boarding schools and then forgetting her over the summers. And so my mom grew up in like homes that weren't hers and with people that she didn't know. And she longed to be loved and have a family. And so my grandma would visit from time to time, and she'd always be in cute little fancy cars. She always drove a Carmen Ghia. She'd show up in her little Carmen Ghia and jewelry and, just looked like she was having a ball. And so my mom desperately wanted to be with her. And so she got that opportunity when she was a teenager. My mom went to live with my grandma, and it turned out that my grandma had turned to a life of racketeering and prostitution and was running a place out in the Mojave Desert. And she turned my mom out to work that business. And my mom never went to another day of school and was physically abused and sexually abused. And my mom told me of these 2 babies that she put up for adoption when she was a teenager. And she had a picture of one of she had a boy and a girl. She had a picture of the boy. And she must have touched that picture a million times. And she told me that she tried to keep him, but it wasn't safe for him, so she sent him to live with another family. And then when she got pregnant again, she put that baby up for adoption without seeing her. And it made sense suddenly why she was so insistent that I terminate that pregnancy when I was 13. Right or wrong, our perception is our reality. And my mom knew that reality of what she'd experienced, and she was trying to spare me. I had always thought she did it to hurt me because I was bad and that it was some kind of, crazy punishment. And now I can see that she did it because she was trying to spare me. And I can see the things that she did was to ensure that I had a better life than she did and a better life than my grandma. And I actually had the life of a princess compared to the life they had. And she told me of her experiences and the things that happened to her and the people that did things to her. And just really, I've never heard a worse story inside or outside of Alcoholics Anonymous. I couldn't imagine that this was my mom's story. My mom never dated again after my dad died. She never really had any friends. She worked and worked and worked and then sat in front of a TV and smoked until the end. That's really what my mom's life was. So I never imagined any of this. And I had spent my whole life being mad at my mom for not giving me love and direction and all these things that I thought she had and withheld them from me because she deemed me unworthy. And it turned out she never had them to give. I'd been mad at her my whole life for not giving me something she never possessed. And so there was great freedom in that. And I think for her too, because she had not spoken these secrets out loud in over 30 years. But she could now because that bridge was built with the calls and the cards and I was safe. And as she told me things, I could say to her, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And she wasn't married to my dad. She was my dad's mistress, and so there was great shame in that. But that explained when my dad died, his survivor benefit went to his wife, and to me, she used that money to pay bills. And she cleared up a whole lot of stuff that I had questions about that she didn't even know that I had questions about. And instead of, if I had heard this at 2 weeks sober, it would have been all about me and how could she and what does this make me and what if people find out. But because I had some recovery under my belt, instead I began to have a mad crush on my mom. I thought she was so cool that she was able to do everything that she was able to do and keep me in the same house until I graduated from high school. She didn't have any of that. And I'd already learned to take my mommy stuff to my sponsor and to my girlfriend, so I got to just love Betty. That was her name. I used to call her Boop. And she was the funniest human being. She loved all kinds of music. I credit her with my love of music. And she was just such a lonely person. And she said, I envy you. And I said, you do? Why? And she said, because you're able to have intimate relationships with people. She said, I've never been able to do that. I never knew why somebody liked me or didn't like me. And so I try and do the thing I think they like, but maybe that wasn't the thing they liked. And it just got too hard. So I just stopped trying. And that's what she did and lived alone the rest of her life. And had it not been for AA, she wouldn't have had anyone. I was the only one she had, and she was diagnosed with cancer a few years after that, and it was lung cancer, and it went to her bones, and then it went to her brain, and I got to take care of her the last few months of her life. And that wouldn't have been possible otherwise, and I like to tell this story because it describes her so perfectly. She was 75 years old. She's so sick and dying. We know that at that point. I don't even know why we were still having tests, but we went to the hospital, and the x-ray technician came out, and my mom said, "This won't affect my ability to bear children, will it?" And we just laughed, and I thought, I would have missed all of that had I followed the well-meaning suggestions of friends and therapists who, talked about confronting and setting boundaries and all these kind of aggressive stances, when in AA I was taught about love and tolerance, tending to my side of the street. And so I got to just love her, and where I turned to drugs and alcohol, she turned to hoarding. It was really bad, like on TV, bad hoarding, bad. And I tried to fix her and change her, and my sponsor would very kindly remind me that she had a higher power and it wasn't me. What? So I got to just love my mom where she was at, and I'm so grateful for that. And I miss her. I miss her every day. I think about her every day, and I feel like I get asked to talk, I think, in part because of this story of our relationship, and I feel like it's still her giving me this better life. My mom never traveled anywhere, never even went to movie theaters or anything. I mean, she just never went anywhere. And I've been able to travel all over, and because of this, and I'm very grateful. In the past however many years, over my sobriety, I've been married and divorced twice. I am a serial monogamous now, so that's good news. But But relationships have been a little bit slower for me. I hit a suicidal depression with double-digit sobriety because I was really nursing my pain, thinking about my pain. I was really into my pain. I was having a lot of chronic pain. Did I mention I was in pain? And I was staying home and really thinking about that all the time. And I'd married a man I shouldn't have been on a second date with. And I wasn't willing to do the stuff I was willing to do when I was new, and my world got small and scary. And I hit a point where I knew I couldn't kill myself, because I think if you kill yourself, you have to come back and repeat all the lessons of this life. And I'm like, screw that, I'm halfway done. I'm not doing that. And I knew I couldn't drink. And really, this last part of my sobriety started with this thought: how do I best want to spend the rest of my wretched time on this hideous planet? And so I thought maybe I could be of service to someone. And what I did is I made like a newcomer without picking up a drink. I went through the steps again, beefed up my program, and I'd been volunteering at the Midnight Mission in the heart of Skid Row since I got sober on holidays, but I started volunteering a few times a week. And then I ended up getting a job there. And that's where I want to be when I'm not working. And I've been an employee there now for 14 years. And I've always found singing very cathartic since I was a kid. Not so much for my audiences, as it turns out. And it's really heartbreaking to me. People say, follow your passions and desires. You can do or be anything. So I'm like, I'm a singer. I'm going to be a singer. So I took voice lessons and voice classes, and I've done 40-something AA shows. I've done weddings and funerals and whatever, but it's all for fun and for free, and you get what you pay for. I mean, I'm not terrible, but I couldn't make a living at it. And I thought, why would God give me this passion and desire only to have me suck at it? And I thought it was such a cruel twist of fate. And then I started working at the Midnight Mission, and I was exposed to all these people who have no access to art or music. And so I started a music program, and I started bringing in anyone I knew who played a musical instrument. You know, come and play in between lunch and dinner for our homeless community. And so it was once a month, and then more people started coming in, and then it was a couple of times a month, and music's so powerful, it just took on a life of its own, and now there's been hundreds of programs. And I learned from this experience that maybe God gives us these passions and desires not for us to shine, but for it to shine through us. And my job is to follow the passion and desire and stay out of the results, because I don't know how God wants to use me. And I'm really grateful to be sober. Thank you.